All right, and we are officially rolling. So thank you everybody for joining today, and welcome to the Witness and Archivista open source community meeting. First and foremost, the best thing about KubeCon was officially donating Witness and Archivista to the Entoto project. So now we're officially sub-projects, and we will kick off this call with the normal CNCF disclaimer that everything here is subject to be done in accordance with the CNCF Code of Conduct. So pretty straightforward. And if you have any issues with that, we'll take it up. But other than that, I'll share a link here for the notes in the agenda document if folks would like to sign in. There you go. And the first thing we usually do is start off with a welcome for new attendees. If anybody feels comfortable introducing themselves.
So my mic is pretty bad, but my name is Amiki Nada. I work for VMware. I'm interested in supply chain security side of it. Yeah.
Welcome, Amin. I heard a little bit of that. I heard supply chain security, and I know you from VMware, so welcome.
Thanks.
All right, and then the next thing is KubeCon review. So I've intentionally tried to set up the agenda this week so it's not just me talking the whole time. So I'll first kick it off to everybody else. How was KubeCon? How was the engagement around the projects? Any takeaways, any insights, anything interesting? I think maybe one of the coolest things other than the donation was seeing references to Witness on the keynote stage at KubeCon. So that was super cool. How about everybody else?
Yeah, I think KubeCon went really well this year, especially for like both the Entoto and the Witness projects, right? Like Entoto had a lot of call outs as well. Obviously we got the donation done during KubeCon, which was huge. But also just being able to get all of the Entoto, like not all of them, I know we missed a few people, but like a ton of the Entoto contributors, everyone in the same room for a little bit was really cool.
Yeah, I also enjoyed the maintainers track for Entoto, the demo of the new policy language evaluating Sky. So it's exciting to see. Okay, well, there's some convergence that can happen between the stuff that we developed over the last 2 years and Aditya has been working on. So yeah, that's super exciting to me, and to see like, okay, yeah, this is actually going to happen. And we're going to have this common spec that we can all use.
Awesome. I think, yeah, it's going to be super exciting to see where things go. KubeCon Paris, we've got 9 more days before the CFP closes. So if you have any thoughts or ideas, want any help with a Witness or Archivista talk, or anything related to supply chain security, I'd be super interested to collaborate on that. And yeah, so the next thing we have is the Witness and Archivista roadmap. So one of the things that is kind of like short term, and I have not yet, let me share my screen quick. I'm raising my hand. I always get that icon wrong on Google Meet. But so there's this thing called CLO Monitor, and it stands for Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF. I don't know why they went with CLO instead of like CNCF Monitor, but basically what it does is just monitors a whole bunch of CNCF projects for all kinds of different things. And so we updated this after the donation to pick up some of the new repositories that we have and also add some of the extra repositories from Intoto itself. And they have different types of checks that they can do. There's a community check, docs check, code light check, and then the code check. And you can see that some of the projects are a little bit lower here on the overall scores. And a lot of this is just like getting a combination of getting Clo Monitor to recognize all of the work that you've done. And the other part is just making sure you go through kind of all the best practices and things. And so like we don't have a contributing.md file. So adding that in, it'll be super easy to like, especially for our project, get this up to 100% pretty quickly. And I think there's a lot of good first issue potential here. So I'll go through and create a bunch of issues for this. And then some of the stuff as well is like slightly I don't know if questionable is the right word, but it's like maybe it's opinionated, like having a DCO for the project is one of these things where, especially with the CNCF projects, it's probably not like a required thing, but it's a thing that's in here. I think you can disable the check with a .clo monitor, YAML file or something in the repo itself. And then getting like an OpenSSF best practices badge. We already have the scorecard badge. So getting the best practices one as well, another interesting thing to do. And then just some other like things where like generating an SBOM. I have to look into that one a little bit more and see like what they actually want, because we want to definitely make a signs in total attestation for an SBOM. I don't know if that will get picked up or not by this. The other super interesting thing going through this process is documenting it and like helping other people achieve the same sort of standards with something similar to Clo Monitor, leveraging tools like Witness and Archivista. So there's definitely a synergistic relationship here. And I think the other part is that like Clo Monitor itself is an open source project. So we can contribute back to it to help improve the checks, to look for things like, are you generating attestations? Which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think this is a project that might benefit from that abstraction that Intoto provides, right, over all those types of metadata. Then it'd be usable by more than just Clo Monitor, right? It could be used by, you could use it to evaluate supply chain policy for all these open source projects. I think that'd be interesting to look at. Is it written in Go?
I think so. We can go double check real quick.
Yeah, I think some of these are like I'm pretty sure we're generating an SBOM through Go Releaser.
We
So
are.
I think we just need to like get Clo Monitor to look at it the right way to see that it's there. So some of these should be super easy to lift.
Yeah, and I think that's it'll be good because there's more. This was also part of the Security Slam event. So there were a lot of different open source projects contributing or fixing their projects up as a part of the Security Slam, leveraging a tool like Clo Monitor. There's also an effort right now in the OpenSSF around trying to help people have some sort of like standard templates and other stuff like that to kind of set up a secure supply chain. And so this is really going through this process for our own projects has been a really good learning experience for what that kind of futuristic, not so futuristic near-term template would look like for some of these projects. How do you create a new repository or add into your project, creating attestations for everything, signing everything, generating all this other metadata, adhering to all the best practices and things like that. So and so we'll definitely have kind of like a readout or something like that for this as we make more progress. And I'll throw out a few good first issue issues and we can kind of see how it goes. And then I think the other things, I haven't actually put these on the roadmap, but just for one, like actually creating a roadmap that people can look at in the GitHub project. But we have lots of different plugins that are possible into Witness. And so we've been having conversations on the signing side with a couple of interesting groups like OpenPubKey. So they had their first community call this week. And Ethan, one of the co-creators of it, was talking about kind of what it would take to get to 1.0 release for them, a GA kind of thing. And then also the Docker folks were there talking about kind of the long-term validation with the public key transparency. Really, we don't have to worry about any of those things with the plugin, because we can just write the plugin and consume the work they're doing and have support for it. And they're super excited to see the potential possibility there with something like Witness. The other group was Notation, or Notary V2. This is another signing project that is kind of the new version of the older Notary project that had issues kind of transporting signatures across from different registries and environments. They're also not only very interested in having broader support of their signing mechanism, but they also want to be able to create more attestations. And so there's a really good relationship both ways there of how they can, they're interested in contributing new predicate types to in toto, and also figuring out how to integrate in a broader ecosystem for signing. One of the things as well with Notation is the I completely lost my train of thought. Is the envelopes as well. And so this is another thing that's like, I don't know if it's a potential future thing or not, but they typically do things like, I don't know if they do Kosei and Jose both, but we support DSSE today. And Mikhail, I don't know for sure if I don't know that the attestation spec from Intoto specifically requires a Dizzy envelope. But like, even if it does, if there's enough demand and interest to supporting different envelope formats, I think that would be a fairly minimal change.
I'm fairly sure the attestation, like the actual Intoto attestations, don't require DSSC. I think it was fairly designed with the idea of being able to swap those out in general. I know we've had talks in the past from the Witness side of things about supporting Cozy. We've had some interest from some groups that wanted Cozy signatures. And from the code perspective of Go Witness, it should be a pretty easy lift. We did a lot of work early on to make sure that we weren't tightly coupled to a specific envelope. But yeah, to answer your actual question, I'm fairly certain the attestations don't demand Dizzy in any way.
Cool. Yeah. And then I think the other category of things is on the attestation side itself, or the attesters. And so Mikhail is going to do a cool demo today of VSAs. And there was also a submission around kind of an OSPO approval attestation into the attestation group. And so I think as that kind of gets developed and fleshed out, then we can look at adding an attester for that as well. And I also think that we've had some conversations about a Salsa build provenance. This would be a post attester to kind of generate that. There was just somebody today asking in the Salsa Slack channel about how to build a Salsa, how to generate a Salsa build provenance in their own private environment. They're like, a lot of the solutions today that do this are GitHub Actions. There are other publicly accessible things, and it's a set of tooling that's not available to them. So I think there could be some good opportunity for something like that. And the other thing that this could be really useful for is the idea of a kind of the opposite side of the integrations is how to get more folks consuming Go Witness. And so one of the things that's come up in conversation, if we support things like Open Pub-Key, is integrating directly into BuildKit itself. And so then you could have BuildKit when you do Docker buildx, you could create not only signed attestations, but you could create more flexible set of attestations for things like the SBOMs that get created as a part of that, or the build provenance. And so I think that would be really interesting opportunity for us to do that. There was a proposal to be able to do signing through the official GitHub action for the Docker build in push. And some of the feedback on that proposal was, yeah, we should definitely support signing of images and provenance and everything else, but we should not do it at the GitHub action level. We should do it down in the build kit level. And so that caught my attention and seemed like a really great opportunity there. So, I mean, there's tons of potential future work. And then I think on the Archivista side, I think, the big thing that we have that we're interested in is kind of integrating Tough and storing policies into Archivista. And so that's another thing that we'll probably be kicking that work off in a couple of weeks and collecting feedback from the community around. This is another thing that the Docker folks are working on with their move towards having all of the Docker official images built through GitHub Actions. Is they want to be able to then be able to create trust policies around that as well too. And so that came up on the call, and there's a Tough community call next Wednesday where we're going to kind of review their proposal, and I think we can incorporate that feedback. The thing that they want to be able to do is to store all of the policies and things like that in an OCI registry. And so I think there's a opportunity that, and then this is maybe another broad area of roadmap, is the storage backend for Archivista is it's not super opinionated about where you store things today, and one possible future storage backend could be an OCI registry itself. So that may have some compatibility with the work that they're thinking about. So that's like a super high level thoughts around some of the things there. Super interested if anybody else has any thoughts or ideas about things you'd like to see on the roadmap. And we also need to figure out a release cadence, when we could get some of these things done and everything else like that. So
I did want to circle back a little bit to the signers that you mentioned with Witness. I know one thing, we did a lot of work recently to support Vault's PKI secrets engine. I think we also need to circle back and do some of the less interesting signers, like all the cloud KMS services, the Vault transit engine and stuff like that. So I don't know where that falls in our roadmap. I know we have there's a lot of interesting work in that area right now with all the Open Pub-Key stuff that I think everyone's really interested in, and rightfully so. But we, at some point, also have to get some of the more basic ones done.
Yeah, and I think those are really good ones too, where it's like if we do one of them, we have a good example for this is how we could get someone else from the community to maybe kind of follow that example and work on some very similar, hopefully lower lift opportunities. Cool.
Yeah, I know there's some actually pretty decent code for some of those key providers and cosign that we might be able to look at for some inspiration. I know Dan had pointed me to those at one point. I don't know. I don't think the interfaces are compatible, but it should definitely be some good inspiration to help accelerate some of that.
And I guess another thing, oh, sorry, go ahead. Someone, I don't want to interrupt anyone. So another thing I think long-term, or I guess medium-term for Archivista, I think we kind of need to look at is our data, our MySQL data, and some things around that. I don't want to, don't want to go too deep technically in a community call, but one thing I have some concerns about is how we're storing some of the data, specifically subjects. So equal subjects are kind of weird, right? Like, do you consider a subject with the same name and the same hash equal, or different name and the same hash equal? Like, how do you correlate those? And how we're storing them in the MySQL database has some things. Right now, we're not normalized at all. We're just like throwing stuff in. Like, if you have two attestations with the same exact subjects, those become two different subjects in the database. This makes querying some things a little inefficient and hard. So I don't know what the right answer is, but I think as a community, sometime in the nearest future, we should take a look at how we're actually like our actual data storing and what makes sense if we need to do some migrations and normalization releases. That's more of a tech debt thing more than a cool fancy feature in our roadmap though. So hard to get too excited about that.
How do you think some of that stuff affects performance? Do you think? I mean, I think that kind of determines how it is in the roadmap, right? You know, we're talking about using Archivist at scale, which I know some of our users are interested in, right? We know that, right? That could be something that could really help us out there.
100% agree. And this is actually where this is kind of driven from for our own, Testify Sex usage of Archivista. Some of the queries we want to do gets a little hairy with the way the subjects are. Like if we want to correlate, because projects are essentially a subject, right? If we have a GitHub subject for a repo, right now, every attestation made from that repo will create a new subject. So you might have 10,000 attestations for that repo means 10,000 subjects. So if I want to find the first, the last 100 attestations for that project, that query becomes a lot more difficult and really hairy and gross really quickly. So it's definitely some performance concerns there.
Oh yeah. We should probably do something to measure that at some point, and I that might be the first step, but yeah, I think that you're definitely on the right track there. Sounds like something important.
And speaking of tech debt, and while we're talking about roadmap and this like performance type of things, the other thing I think that we'll have to sort out as Archivista in the nearest term is migrations. We use Entgo. Entgo has some Atlas migration stuff it can do. We haven't really tested it out, so I think the Archivista project may have to look at that or whatever else makes sense. We don't have to use anything, right? We can use whatever makes sense. But
and then did you all mention the schema around the attestation types too? Well, that's something that our users have mentioned.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've gotten some feedback. Sorry, I know, John, I don't want to take over. I know your dogs are barking. But we've definitely gotten some feedback about how do we make sure the artifacts that Archivista or the attestations that Archivista is collecting are the actual things they say they are, right? We can trust that the attestation envelope was signed, so we can make sure and validate that signature very basically. But if we have an attestation in there that says I'm a salsa verification attestation, we're currently not doing any like schema validation or anything like that to make sure like this thing actually looks like a. Other than the JSON marshalling, we will JSON marshal it into that thing. But we've gotten some requests about more firm schema validation on injection, I guess is the short answer long.
Yeah, it might help with policy too. Validate policy against the schema. I think there's a lot of benefits to that.
And I think, as the Entoto attestation group, they're working on protobuf definitions for a lot of these things. So we might be able to leverage the work that group is doing to help out quite a bit.
Oh yeah. By the way, circle back around to KubeCon. There's a booth right across our booth, the buff team. And I was talking to him about what we're doing with these attestations, the attestation working group, how we may have different repositories for these things for contributors or private things, right? And that may be a tool that we might want to look at to managing some of that for our community stuff. It's free for any community, like open source communities. So I think it could be something worthwhile. Could reduce some of the complexity around managing protobus from n number of repositories, which actually sounds really, really horrible. And it's a really tough thing. It's a barrier to entry, right? When we have to figure out how to compile all these protobus, right? I think that's been your major complaint about it since I've ever known you, Mikhail, is you hate protobus because of the tool chain, right? So if we want to have, if the community wants to use protobuf, right, how do we make that accessible to, users that may not have experience with that tool chain? Might be an answer there. Do you know any of those guys, John?
I do not, but I did hear that the StackBlock folks are using that as well too. So
okay.
I thought that was super interesting. Yeah, and I think the other like main area I think is not. I put policies down in the notes, but also policy unification with Aditya's work in the in-toto attestation verifier and the stuff Marcella's done with the Sky verifier, kind of like trying to converge on that policy verification stuff and in the definitions of policies, everything else. I think there's a lot of interesting work going on there. And that's like more generally, getting all the stuff from Witness and Go Witness in line with the actual in-toto specification for attestations and overall. And I don't think there's a whole lot of work there, but just making sure that we do that as we're in the official repos now and things. The other thing, I put a link to an issue here as well. I'll put this in the chat, which is, so this is a super interesting issue. It came up from a user. I think Cole knows who this is, but he or they filed a potential fix for being able to glob the product attestation that gets created to include certain things or exclude certain things. And part of what he put in the feedback as far as his reasoning for wanting to do this is that they're using please.build, which is not something I'm super familiar with, but they have a monorepo with a very large number of things. And so when we do the material and product attestation for different things, it's taking over 10 minutes to be able to create that attestation, and it's resulting in a larger than 1 gigabyte attestation because there's a lot of files, a lot of hashing to do, a lot of things to store and create. So like, I think there's this philosophical question, like, should we allow someone to, as a parameter, include or exclude stuff that's a material or product? And the way I've been thinking about this, and I've really gone back and forth, so discussing this in the community call is great, because like thinking of what the value of that attestation is when you want to run a policy later on, I think is my main question of like, is there value in even running that attester if you have incomplete data? At the same time, like, we've really wanted to err very side towards letting end users decide how to use the tooling, what they want to use for signing, what sort of attestations they want to create, how do they want to store things. Like, we always want that to be as flexible as possible. We want to let the end users make their own decisions about this. However, like, I want to make sure that it's still something that's safe and secure. So,
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Cole.
Fred and I had actually talked about this in response to the OmniTrail work, right? And it's like, I think we have an opportunity here to solve some of the issues. If you look at the OmniTrail file container, let me see if I can get the struct here. Where is it? But if you look at that, I think you can define which directories are in there, right? And then what directories we track versus. And so we could plug into that and say, okay, yeah, here, as long as we say, as long as we're transparent about it, we're okay. But yeah, I just kind of want to connect that thread there. My mental model is not completely complete with the Omni Trail and how this would work, but I just think there's something there. But Mikhail, you were going to say something.
No, I was gonna allude to the same thing. I don't have I know Fred had the drop. I don't have a great mental model myself of the Omni Trail. I was gonna go to the same, like, I think a lot of that may be able to help here. Additionally, I think, so I was kind of thinking about this last night, you know, the pain they're experiencing with is the mono repo and like the node, specifically, like they have many projects with many node module folders, and we all know what node modules the hell is, right? Like that's a nightmare. One thing, the reason why when we added those exclude and include globs for the subjects was because when you like attesting to an npm install, you don't really necessarily care to expose every single file as a product subject, but you do kind of want to still maintain, like, make sure the files within that folder stay consistent between your steps. So like if I use those npm node modules later in my build, I want to make sure someone didn't go in and tweak a file, right? Like that's a huge supply chain risk, specifically with JavaScript. So we still recorded them as subjects, which is the pain they're feeling right now. Like you get a gigabyte thing because you have thousands of JavaScript files in these folders. So yeah, exactly where you were going, Paul. I know Fred's work with OmniTrail, OmniWork could be super interesting here. Additionally, instead of like recording hashes for every single file, maybe we could roll up the hashes into like a folder. So we still have to record them, which doesn't alleviate their concerns about time. Like it would still take us the time to go record all those hashes. But we could, and then you wind up with the problems of like ordering and all that. But we could do something like that and just like record a whole folder of everything in that hash, which I think is kind of the trail that Omnivore is going down, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, we still need to hash all the things, right? And I think when you have a mono repo, you're just getting all the edge nodes or the leaf nodes all at once, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I wonder if there's some way to compress that or cache some of those results to help with that. I know we're probably going to run into the issue with our mono repo, right? I think we've already seen some performance issues there, especially once you start including all of the subtrees. So, I mean, step back a second. If for those of you on the community call, we internally use subtrees and a mono repo for some of the products that we're building. So we run into some of these same issues. And I think we're going to as we grow, and that code base grows. So definitely something we have to figure out.
And then the other train of thought I had going around this is it may be okay to exclude certain things from attestations, but it shouldn't be the person generating the attestation's decision. It should be the person verifying the policy's decision, right? Like that's the person defining their risk appetite, not the person giving us the attestation. So if the person writing a policy says, yeah, fine, I don't care, like ignore node modules all you want, I'm not going to create artifact rules around that, then that's their decision. And if you did say in your policy that we want those node modules and you didn't provide them, then we fail verification because the attestation generator didn't provide that. One thing, the way that, in Toto Golang and the Toto spec allows for this is the artifact rules in their layouts, right? They have a fairly robust language of saying that this stuff must create these files, must create, can only modify these files in their link metadata. And Witness doesn't have a full implementation of that. We kind of we circled it a little bit and just did like an artifacts from key. So we made the UX around it a little easier, saying like just anything that step created needs to be consistent for this step is essentially all we're saying. But we lost out on that ability to make more granular levels of like decisions about what files actually get created, what files get modified between steps. So something like that could help alleviate my concerns with this change as well, because if the policy itself is the one that says, don't worry about node modules, then that's, on them. It's not on the person hiding something in the attestation.
I wonder if there is like builds always an interesting topic because there's so many different ways for everything to be built. And we've talked about this a little bit with the OCI attester around all the different ways of building container images, right? Like the every tool may store has different opinions about like how to store things on disk when they're building, or do they push it directly to a registry and not store anything on disk? Do they what options do they give you? Docker build kit, you can't output in two different ways from one build, right? You can't store a container image locally and push it to a registry in one step. And so like trying to understand then how to witness that and observe that is it gets a little bit more complicated. And so the same thing I'm suggesting here is like different languages and the way they manage dependencies is another area where it's like we could think about becoming more opinionated or more involved with that process. I think the one thing that's really interesting with node modules in this is the idea of what does the process actually look like validating the new NPM build and publish provenance. And I don't think that's a thing. I don't know if that's built into the NPM ecosystem yet or not, but I wonder as well of like, those become a lot of the products that are created, but not necessarily like in the same way of up-leveling just the file attestations. Is there a way to essentially up-level it to a validation of the provenance of that package itself, and then we kind of know from that these are all of the files and kind of the state of that module as it comes in. I don't know if that makes sense or if I've lost people.
No, I think it makes sense, right? The closer, one of the problems that we run into with like these types of things in general is the closer you get to the compilation, the closer you get to the thing that's actually building it, the better, right? Like that's going to have the most trustworthy information about what it's doing. I guess I don't have to add much more than that other than just kind of turning through what you said, like kind of thinking through what we could do with.
Yeah, I think you get to a point, right? There's always going to be a limitation on what we can do with witness when we're wrapping a process. It's always going to be based upon the limitation or what that tool does and what the output of that tool does. So I think the long-term goal, right, for the Entoto community is to have tools themselves generate these attestations, right? Witness right now is just a stopgap until we can help make that happen. A long way to go to get there. I think we're going to need witness for a long, long time, but eventually, right? We're already seeing it with Docker. Right? How do we leverage Docker's the attestations it generates, within witness, or conversely, right? How do we help Docker create better attestations about their build process that this ecosystem can then consume? So we need to do some stuff to get there, right? I think we need to look at what the Entoto community is doing with ITE 10 and 11 and coalesce on that. And then looking at, hey, how well does Go Witness integrate with this other tool chains? Where are the pain points around that? And the less friction we can have around that. And, the way I've integrated a couple of times, I don't think there's that much friction at all. There's a couple little things I think we can solve, but then we can start accelerating some of that. And then these questions become a lot easier because we're just removing that part of the process, right? And we don't have to worry about witness. We just have to worry about consuming the attestations and generating policy against them in Archivista.
Awesome conversation. Super, super interesting stuff. Mikhail, I forgot to ask you how long your demo would take, and we've got 15 minutes left. So
I should be plenty of time. I'll speed run it.
Awesome. Cool.
Also, I wanted to say hi to Cairo. I saw you jump in the middle of that conversation, so I wanted to make sure. Said hi.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you. All
right. Yeah, so I'll go ahead real quick. So we talked a little bit. John mentioned some stuff we were doing with. Pull this up. I'm assuming y'all can see my screen. I can't see you, so I'm gonna thumbs up.
Looks
just go with it. Okay. So we got Salsa's got this definition of a verification summary attestation. And essentially what this defines is what policy was verified, the results of that policy, and then like all the input attestations that were used to verify this policy. I think it's fairly obvious, you know, the number of use cases this would have for us. This is a really common sense, just makes a ton of sense attestation. I think they're in the process of moving this. Well, I know they're in the process of moving this over to the Intoto namespace. This isn't going to be a Salsa thing forever. But there's also some stuff that we wanted to use this for internally at Testify Stack, right? We wanted to be able to display and be able to give users the ability to like actually see why their policies failed, why their policies were passed, you know, what was going on, and dig into that. So over the past few weeks, we've been toying with this in Go Witness and implementing these for Salsa. So John came up with a wonderful idea back at a retreat we had of like, what if we had a witness verify essentially just be a witness run that, you know, ran this policy verification at a tester that would spit out this policy verification summary. So that's what we did. We went and tested it out, and I could dive. I don't want to go too deep into the code. The code will be up at a PR here shortly. There might be a draft PR for it up already in Go Witness. I can't remember with the transformation or the transfer and everything, but we'll get that up there if it's not. So we have this software factory demo, and we're building some images for this. So this is just a basic like hello world. It'll do a bunch of different steps actually. John put a lot of work into this of like looking at the pipeline here. I'm not as familiar with here we go. This is the view I'm looking for. So we see all the different things that's going into this, right? We got formatting, vetting, linting, unit testing. And we can use all this as, you know, all of this is attested by a witness, and we can use this in policy decisions later. I don't have a witness CLI version built to support this, but we have a gatekeeper data provider. That's the word I'm looking for, sorry. That will actually test these policies, these witness policies, when a image comes in for admission to a Kubernetes controller. So we wrote a data provider for Gatekeeper that'll go and test these witness policies, and then we'll spit out these VSAs for us. So we're going to take this image here, and let me switch to my terminal. Can you see my terminal now? Again, I can't see it.
No terminal.
Okay, I gotta reshare here differently. Please don't make me restart my browser to do this. My apologies. I think I got it now. I just can't let this share my entire screen. Here we go. Yes. All right. Can you see that?
Roger. Got it.
Awesome.
Looks good.
Here we go. So up here we have the log of our data provider going on. And I'm just going to try to run. We have a policy here. I'll spit out so we can actually look at the policy. So this is a witness policy that's just saying, it's basic, it's not the full policy, but we're just saying, find me images. You know, I'm only going to allow images that have a build image attestation. And it's signed by our SIG-store root of trust. So everything coming in, essentially what this is saying is everything coming into this namespace in our cluster must be signed by a SIG-store root of trust. Very basic policy. But if I try to do a Q control run, and we're going to look for BusyBox. So all I'm going to do is try to run BusyBox, but obviously we didn't build this. We haven't signed it with SIG-store. We have nothing for it. And we should see up here, it's going to look into Archivista. It's going to fail because we don't have any evidence that actually supports this policy. And we're going to get this VSA envelope now. I'm going to reuse my command here from earlier. And this gets stored right in Archivista, so we can look it up for use, but let's go ahead, pipe that out. So we see we get a salsa verification summary spit out from Go Witness from this data provider. It says we failed our policy. This was the we have a little bit of a custom blob in here right now until we can work with the spec to figure out how we want to convey some of the information. But essentially, what we wanted to convey here is like what's the actual digest we use to look up like these attestations. So when we query Archivista, what's that initial subject digest we looked? In this case, it's going to be the image ID. So this is the image ID for the BusyBox, digest ID for the BusyBox image we tried to run. Here's the policy we tried to use. So we have some identifiers about that. So we can look up the policy and then just some basic verify information that, hey, witness did this. Now we're gonna try one more and we're gonna do our, oops. Here we go. So this time we're actually gonna pull that software factory demo image. And we should start seeing up here. So we see it ran, it was allowed in. And if we start looking here, we can see that the data provider spit out the evidence, the attestation that we use to verify this policy, as well as our VSA envelope. So we're going to do that same thing we just did, pull this. My cursor here. And you see now we have a little bit more information on this. So we have the time that we verified the policy, again, the policy information, but now we have input attestations that actually went into this. And this is the same evidence we just used. So we could go query this from Archivista and find this evidence still. We see that now we passed. We had that same information about the initial digest that we used to search into the graph. But we also have a few more additional subjects that we found. If you're familiar with Witness, we have a lot of subjects that each attester exposes. You know, for our Git attester, we might have a commit hash as our subject. This is saying, you know, this is the thing that this attestation is actually talking about. Or in our case of the OCI attester, here's the ID of the image we're talking about. So as part of this VSA right now, again, in our little custom blob, we're including the additional backrefs that we found. So stuff like the GitHub project that this was about, the image tag, you know, more relevant information that the person looking at this might care about to see more VSAs or dig into more information. Like maybe this wasn't allowed to pass. Like why was this thing permitted to the policy? So just a little more helpful information about the reasons Witness made the decision it did. So if we need to dig in later, we can. Now, the other thing that we have in here is if this were the fail, now we saw the failure case here, but we didn't have any evidence for that. If it were to fail and we did have evidence, but the evidence didn't match our policy for one reason or another, in this little blob, it's witness verify info, you would get information about why each of those pieces of evidence was allowed to fail. So maybe the functionary didn't match, like it wasn't signed by Sigstore, but we had an attestation for that artifact, or you know, any REGO policies on that didn't match. So anyway, that's my demo. This is kind of what we're going to get this up and Go Witness here shortly. We're cleaning it up after KubeCon, obviously. But yeah, really excited about this feature. Hopefully people will find use out of this. And there's also some interesting consequences to these being attestations in their own right? We could theoretically write policies that say, you know, I need a VSA for a different policy. So now we can kind of compose policies together or chain them together in different ways. You can delegate a piece of your policy to someone else who you trust to write that policy and say, hey, I want a VSA from them, signed by them as a functionary, and now all these steps as well. So there's a lot of neat things I think this opens up for us with Witness. And I'm really excited about what we can do and what the community can find, and you know, if this works for them, and if you know what else we need to do to support this. But yeah, that's my demo.
Super awesome, Mikhail. And I think there's an interesting conversation on the pull request for moving the attestation, the VSA, back into the Intoto group. One of the things that the folks from Google had mentioned was the idea of being able to kind of segregate trust, and so you could give trust into the verifier, and the verifier, similar to the way that Witness is emitting that specific policy stuff, they want to try and abstract it to a set of like traits or properties that are verified. So you don't have to expose the policy or the attestations, but you get a lot more context around the value of that verification because of the trust you can place in the verifier, without having to see a bunch of evidence that people may be uncomfortable sharing. And so I thought that was a really interesting way of being able to transfer trust between organizations without having to transfer information. And it's like today we do that with an empty attestation, a signature, right? That was a great phrase that came up at KubeCon of like, you could sign stuff and that essentially represents the same thing, but being able to provide a little bit more information could have a lot of additional value.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, given the context around some of the stuff with that self-attestation form and SSDF, and that's starting to look like it's going to happen. You know, CIS is not backing down on it. So, you know, if you want to prove that your organization follows these practices, right, and have the full auditability and traceability of those processes, but yet still keep those processes somewhat opaque, right? Not disclose your source code, not necessarily disclose all the process that you do, right? I think this would be a good way to do that. At least communicate that risk as an organization that you've taken that risk.
Awesome. We've got just a few minutes left. Does anybody have anything else? Anybody sneak anything onto the agenda while I was watching the demo? Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you in advance to all the people who will watch the recording. We'll get it posted as soon as we can. And we'll be back here again next month. We'll also be at the Intoto community call, which will be in a couple of weeks, and the top community call next week as well too. So there's a ton of intersection between a lot of these different communities, and we're, you know, definitely with Witness and Archivista as sub projects for Intoto now. I think having those conversations in other places as well is definitely okay. So. Awesome. Well, we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, John. Thank you.